Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing really well. Thanks for joining this morning. So today I'm going to be talking about a little bit about bringing accessibility into your organization. I've called it actually organizational zero to hero. Carol Ann, hey, good morning. Thanks for participating in the chat there. All right, so we're going to start off here, do a quick introduction about myself. I'm going to jump right into the talk, accessibility strategy from organizational zero to hero. Things like bringing accessibility into that software development life cycle, talking to stakeholders, that eternal question, I've got no time, we've got no money. How do we bring accessibility into work? Things like review periods and just getting back to work and encouraging your team to really go back to basics, because once you find that you commit to those basics, you'll find that a lot of this just comes naturally. Then I got a little short session here for developers. I hope there's some technical people on the line this morning. We're going to talk about how do you fix those most common accessibility issues. I'm going to bring you through a publication that came out recently, the Web A11y. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, but yeah, I hope you all stay tuned for that. Then we're going to have a short Q&A session afterwards, and this should all take about 45 minutes. So introductions, who am I? Hi, everyone, I'm Cam. I'm a senior accessibility consultant. I have a major focus on that mid to enterprise range and level clients. In the past life, I was a full stack developer, but I've also dabbled in things like systems architecture and organizational strategy, really focusing on that delivery side and delivery. On screen, I've got a picture of myself, and also I've got 2 links there for my code pen, where I will be sharing all the code, if I do have any, in this presentation. I just put it up on CodePen. It's a very accessible platform, and it's really great for sharing that kind of stuff. As well, I've got my LinkedIn there and my blog too. And in case you see A11y, for those who aren't maybe initiated, that just stands for accessibility. This is a short form for spelling out accessibility. The 11 characters between the A and the Y to kind of replace that. So I may say Ali, I may say accessibility, I may say ally, stuff like that. It all just means the same thing. It's all just accessibility. Now, I think I'm just going to start off and say, I get this question a lot, where do I actually download the slides? I've got it available right now. You can either download it and follow along, download it, keep it for later if you can't make it through the whole session. The website to go there right now is tinyurl.com/tac/-gad-2021. Once again, that's tinyurl.com/tac-GAAD-2021. All right, and just before we get started, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I'm fortunate enough to do business here in Southern Ontario is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Wyandot, Tionotani, Seneca, and Anishinaabe, and most recently the Mississaugas of Credit River. And staying in Southern Ontario is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to live and work in this community. And with that, let's get started. So a little bit of interaction this morning on the talk. I know it's only 9:06 a.m., but if anyone has their wallet nearby, and maybe I should also stipulate, in case you're Canadian, pull out some money. Did you know that our Canadian dollars actually has some tactile features, some accessibility features on the actual bills themselves? If you can see on screen here, they're actually right at the top here. Right at the top. It's actually like Braille. It's inspired by Braille, and it was developed in Canada in association with the Canadian National Institute of the Blind. And it was suggested by Bruno Thériault about 20 years ago. It was developed in 2001. And so that means it's been about 20 years that we've had accessibility features on our money. And I always talk about this kind of thing with my bigger clients, my banking clients and stuff like that, just because it really starts to humanize like why accessibility really, really matters. And I think that's a key, a cornerstone of bringing accessibility into an organization, is to really talk about it in a way that a lot of people can actually understand. I mean, what's closer to our minds and hearts than our money? It's what's in our bank account, and it kind of is really what matters. And so when I talk to personal banking clients or organizations, and they say, well, it's going to take 3 years to revamp our website. Maybe we need to do that now. Maybe we don't need to do that. And I bring this to them. I say, like, the Canadian Mint actually had to make that same decision. And once they baked it in, once they established some pattern, it was really easy to maintain that pattern. While it's not directly translatable like that, it is a really big benefit to thinking of it like that. You can have a look here. And actually, there's a really neat article. I've got a $100 bill on screen, and I've put 2 circles around the braille, the tactile features on the bills. And you can actually see the different types of like what the actual values of that is based on the dots. But like I said, this is an example of an empathy first, real world example of that, low cost, high impact. And it's interesting because I've heard from other blind individuals that in their countries, and usually in the US, they actually have to fold their bills in certain ways to identify what the value is of that bill, because there's no shape or size difference in the US. I've also heard of some kind of nasty stories of people shortchanging people who are blind and giving them an inferior bill back because they would never know. I mean, that's why I say lead with empathy, right? Make it real. Connect on empathy first. That's usually, and then usually the rest will work out, because if you make it normal, it really does. It's a big benefit like that. So, design takes a pause to create accessible wireframes before actually, just sending it out to developers or editorial. The developers will seek out maybe proper solutions or just dig a little bit deeper and maybe question before they copy paste. It's okay, developers, we all do it. It's fine. Before we copy paste that previous solution, you'll just look and say, well, this image is missing an alt text. Maybe that's important. I maybe should figure that out. QA will ask more questions, and business will write those user stories with a disability persona in mind. And I'm going to go through all these a little bit later in the presentation as well. On screen, I have a banner image from one of my favorite YouTubers, and her name is Lucy Edwards, and she's a blind individual in the UK, and she really does a good job at answering some of the important questions that maybe we're afraid to ask someone who's blind, like how does a blind girl find her purse, or how does a blind person use a stove? It's really great. She's so personable, and if you have a couple moments, she puts out a lot of really short videos between 30 seconds to a minute. Go have a look, and her stuff is really good. I really do encourage it. She's got some long videos in there too, which I really do like, and but this is really great. In the organization, right? If we start to look at some of the major pain points that I've heard in my experience in, what are the factors in not making something accessible? I hear things like, I don't know what my risk is, or I don't know what could happen, or will I get sued, or our legal department says, we must be fully compliant. And I always kind of laugh at that, because like, what does that even mean? No one's actually defined what full compliance is, right? Like, we can try and get to a certain level or match the WCAG, but this is a human condition we're talking about. It's really difficult to really know what full compliance is. Maybe we can't sell to the government anymore. That would be an external factor if a government body requires you to be accessible before you're allowed to sell to them. And I also hear, of course, that question of like, what's the minimum I must do to comply? How do I just, do the bare minimum? Internal factors may be things like, I'm worried that my dev team, doesn't have knowledge, because a lot of developers, they didn't go to school for HTML. They've taken computer science courses, or they've learned through the trade, but they never went to school to really learn what is an image and how should it be properly built. Maybe there's a lack of QA knowledge, how to use a screen reader, or I've get asked this a lot, this sounds really funny, is this really an issue, or stuff like that. Also just pure stakeholder ambivalence, right? Let's just get it over with, or what are the value adds with this? Maybe some of these resonate with you or your organization, or some of the challenges you're facing in bringing accessibility to your organization. Because like I said before, there's no really such thing as full compliance or 100% conforming. No one's going to give you an accessibility report that says a stamp of approval, congratulations, you are accessible. Like, it's not really a thing. And especially if you're doing any kind of updates or releasing new features, all of a sudden you've got to get that checked again. But there is, something as an accessible website, because if we really just look at the truth of reducing those barriers as much as possible, that's really what our goal should be. And I really do come up, I'm on screen, I have a triangle with kind of basic leadership diagram. I'm not a designer, and you can obviously see that from the quality of my PowerPoint presentation here. I try to lead with a top-down, bottom-up approach. You have to kind of engage both the leadership and the delivery teams all at the same time. Kind of operations gets caught in the middle a little bit, but that's okay because they will help bring those standards because they're used to frameworks and those operational standards. And from leadership, you really need that guidance. Like I said, from the ops side, you need those frameworks and gates put in place, and really delivery team, they have to put into practice that the commitment of going back to basics. Kind of as a, before I go deeper into each of these streams, just a very high level start, where do I start? I get this question actually from juniors who are or maybe BAs who know the importance of accessibility, who want to bring into their organization. And when I try to start, I try to look for a stakeholder who owns inclusion, who maybe owns, there's lots of HR department heads who will do something, who will be up to owning this. They're really a great place to start because they can have the authority to enforce or maybe put some of these rules in place. They have to mandate accessibility as a requirement before any release for any new features and commit to a certain level of WCAG. And I'd usually recommend WCAG level 2.1 AA standards. And create that accessibility statement. I still see websites these days that don't have an accessibility statement. This is really, by the way, a barrier or a proof to any kind of legal action that you are on your path. You are on the road to to an accessible website, making sure that you've committed to making things accessible when you release them and out into the wild. Operations can define those definitions of done for accessibility or build gates that prevent inaccessible code. And that can be through processes or technology such as, a CI pipeline, where as soon as code is pushed, it'll automatically audit and stuff like that and raise the more common accessibility issues. That's a very common way to handle this. And in delivery, I really do recommend that each discipline, so your design team, a BA, a developer, a QA, they have to assign a champion, someone who can champion and hold the knowledge of accessibility with them. And that's a huge boon to the organization because anytime there's any kind of questions, they can always go to this individual and get those answers, or at least get on the right path to getting those answers. Make those common resources accessible, things like components or tools or those design standards. Just make sure they're accessible off the bat. And commit to continuous training. It doesn't have to be half-day, full-day training exercises either. We're talking about, a couple quick articles or YouTube videos or stuff like that. This continuous training of making sure that you're better. And it doesn't only have to be accessibility training, right? It can be just basic HTML. And I know I get a lot of eye rolls when I communicate that to senior developers. But back to the example of no one's really gone to school for basic HTML. So we're just displaying what's on screen. So how do we actually sell our case to leadership? And I'm going to say, in the world of accessibility, a lot of advocates or consultants or some companies even, they love to try and do let's scare leadership into compliance, right? Like you're going to get sued or legal action is going to come against you. And that is a real factor. People do get sued and actions do come against companies. But that only works about 50% of the time. It's not I wouldn't say it's a lasting kind of change. What ends up happening is that they burn through a bunch of defects and then accessibility is forgotten for another couple of years. We all know that there's standards worldwide. On screen, I have a map of the world and some boxes just demonstrating different regions and the different standards or legislations. Obviously in Canada, we have the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, AOTA, in Ontario. In the US, there's Section 508 and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And each state, though, has its own legislation and are enacting similar kind of rule sets for that. In Europe, pretty much every country and the European Union as a whole have accessibility standards too. And Asia Pacific. Actually, interestingly enough, if you like a couple of good reads, Japan has some really forward-thinking standards for accessibility. They are really committed to ensuring that their whole population has a really good digital accessible plan. And we know that different legislations have already triggered, litigation inquiries. I mean, this is a fact, right? State of Arkansas, on the bottom left, I have a few examples where accounting systems weren't built properly or web portals were inaccessible and SAP was behind it. for Pennsylvania, Southwest Airlines, Bank of America. I just pulled a couple of examples, and I think we've all heard the Domino's example where, Domino's Pizza made something inaccessible and a user was not able to order pizza. I mean, this is a reality, right? And we know it's already here. So it's time, right, to bring that forward. Troll lawyers are on the rise, I want to say. That's maybe a blanket statement, but it's true. I see more and more a template of a demand letter going to companies, and I help validate these issues too. And immediately I'm able to wipe off 60 to 80% of issues on there. So think about that in your organization. If you have someone who is knowledgeable about accessibility, or you've hired an accessibility consultant, or you've got a QA member who can just help validate the issues that are on a demand letter, you could possibly reduce that risk of exposure and reduce the complaint letter as well to something much smaller. So think about that too. On screen, I have a few data examples of ADA web accessibility related lawsuits, right? In 2017, there was only 814 cases. By 2018, it increased by 181% up to 2,285. I didn't go back and look at the new data, but it seems this is increasing year over year. The biggest organizations, the industries that are being affected the most, retail, food service, travel, maybe not in 2020 or 2021, but any kind of those portals where you have to book and transfer money, banking, financial, entertainment and leisure, any self-service. But these cases are real and they do cost you money. So mitigating that is kind of capital importance. I would much prefer to lead with data. On screen, I have a data set that I helped build with a client, and it was rethinking accessibility from the lens of a customer. And it presents opportunities to sustain compliance and drive progress with profit. I have a donut chart on screen, and we identified 28 million Canadians over the age of 15 identify as having a disability. If we have, that's 22%, that's 6.2 million individuals. 5% have some kind of seeing disability, 5% have a hearing disability, about 13% have a cognitive, 40% have a physical disability, and the rest is uncategorized. We led with senior citizens, and we made this a business case to approach the leadership team. And we said, well, if 22% of Canadians report a disability, and of those 22%, about 50% are aged 55 and over. And this is all available on StatsCan. 45% of personal banking customers are aged 55 and above, which means 46% of these customers contribute to about 46% of personal banking revenue. That's $2 billion, right? Like all of a sudden we talk about an aging population who we know needs assistance in some kind of way. Vision loss will happen to us as we age. So the ability to increase your font size should be a no-brainer now. I mean, senior citizens, I want to say these days, I mean, my dad's 67 and he's tech savvy, right? I mean, we're no longer talking about the seniors who don't know how to use computers. These are tech savvy and they want to keep using technology as they've always used it in their own way. The average revenue per customer age 55 and above is 5% more than the average revenue below 55. So when we presented this to the leadership team, it was a huge selling point. Seeing that $2 billion was a really good way to enact change within the organization. We had a leadership member who owned accessibility going forward. He helped put forward rules within the organization to get those standards put in place. And we were able to go forward with an accessibility remediation plan, which, I mean, it cost a few $1 million. And as that, of course, scales in the size of the organization, but it was much, much cheaper than either the loss or the risk of litigation, in comparison to that $2 billion. Not only that, but what is the cost of waiting? This is a infamous or famous IBM research study that happened. And in 2012, they estimated the cost of fixing a defect, any defect, not only accessibility defect, but a bug on a developer's desktop was about $45. During testing, if you send a defect back to the developer, it costs about $892 in terms of timing, rescheduling, and stuff like that. But in the field, if a defect is released and you have to roll back or bring that defect back into some kind of development cycle, it costs about $27,000. Which means that a 1% reduction based on the study could save as much as $27 million per 1 million lines of code. And you can see that kind of, hockey stick bar chart on the right. I've got a bar chart with 4 states: design, implementation, testing, and maintenance. And the scale just goes up by quite a bit. Design, at 1 times if you fix something in the design phase, which we didn't even talk about on the study, but it goes up exponentially after that. Now, what about ops? Bringing something to the operations team and really tuning the software development lifecycle to making it accessible, or making those standards, bringing those standards forward through there. You have to have an accessibility testing strategy, like by far. The best companies and teams that I've worked with have some way to ensure that their strategies, or they have a methodology and they're not just testing willy-nilly. I like this one. I've worked very closely with lots of my clients on these types of testing, and it works very well for them. You start with your automated tools, things like DAP and IBM. It's a dynamic accessibility plugin. It's just an auditing tool in browser. Chrome Lighthouse, DQ's Axe, or Wave. I mean, these are all browser tools. You can just pick one. You don't have to do all of them all at once. And the responsibility for that really does lie with the developers and the QA. And it's just an automated, it finds those HTML or those basic missing components, or attributes, things like missing alt text. That's a thing. Keyboard testing. I mean, manual testing must happen. A developer and QA should be tabbing through an application, especially on a web application. It's a little bit different for mobile, of course. A web application should be tabbed through, and each interactive element should be tested to interact with, to make sure that you can still use it and that it's operational. And finally, screen reader testing is of course important as well, but that is really the last step. The reason is, if you start with your screen reader testing, which a lot of organizations do, then you end up finding all the really basic issues, like a graphic missing an alt text, where that could just be found like an automated tool like that. You have your 20, it comes up with a list of issues, and your screen reader testing really does require a little bit of training, a little bit of knowledge as well. So it might take a while to get up to that range, but you'll still find most of your issues in the automated tools. Screen reader testing really does, I believe, lie as a QA's responsibility. I don't generally train developers on how to use a screen reader, and that's just personal preference. Your organization may be a bit different. Maybe the lines are kind of blurred between developers and QA a little bit more, but some of the example tools are NVDA on desktop, or JAWS as well for Windows. VoiceOver operates on iOS and all Apple devices, and of course, TalkBack for Android is the only tool you can use on Android. Once you've kind of figured out your plan, you've got to bring your scope. You have to figure out exactly what to do. You can start small. Really, I know that through data, most of your issues can be found through one screen reader and one browser combination, as well as one mobile device and its associated screen reader as well. So Chrome and NVDA, iOS and VoiceOver, you just start testing with that. You get your 100% test coverage with that. And maybe you do spot checks with Firefox and JAWS, and Android and TalkBack. What is a spot check, by the way? It's kind of thrown around, but I generally speak of spot checks as things like high traffic pages, things like purchase flows, high value pages. If maybe you have like a marketing campaign going on, you want to make sure those are fully accessible. Contact us pages are huge. In fact, a lot of people who use screen readers or have various disabilities, they seek that contact us page because calling someone on the phone is much easier sometimes than navigating through a website and trying to seek some information like that. A sitemap also is used as I don't use sitemaps anymore, but a lot of people who use screen readers or have various disabilities still look for that because it's a central location for the entire site. Landing pages, home pages, of course, confirmation pages. This would be like maybe after a purchase. Checkout pages, and something that's not really talked about a lot are emails or newsletters that are being sent out. Those need to be checked as well for accessibility, because I see a lot of issues there as well. Now, one thing I get asked a lot as well is, can we fully automate? And no, it's just not a reality. Just like a lot of things in life can't be fully automated. You still need some kind of human interaction to get involved there. But you can mitigate. And I always say shift left as much as possible. Get those design systems audited by an approved auditing team, and make sure the colors are already pre-checked and you know which colors can be used by your design team to produce some kind of feature. Minimize custom widgets, use native elements as much as possible, and your continuous integration pipeline, Jenkins and stuff like that, they can just include an accessibility scan. So as soon as code is pushed, immediately an audit is done. Full automation won't ever be possible, and overlays, companies like A11y and A11y and stuff like that is pure snake oil. Do not consider them. I would be happy to give you a free demonstration of how ineffective overlays are. And I can show you there's absolutely zero benefit to disabled users. And in fact, they introduce more barriers. If you need a demo of that, more than happy to show that. Some of the other best practices: engage an accessibility subject matter expert at certain intervals, at discovery or delivery and deployment. Developers' definition of done should include accessibility, and common components should be audited, like previously mentioned. There's also some really neat accessible component libraries coming out these days. Bootstrap has been doing a great job at making their components accessible. Same thing with Google's, the Angular material design, also looking very good for accessibility these days. But there's a new one called Whatsock, and that was just released. And I'm just giving a quick shout out to the Apex 4 library, which operates very similar to jQuery, where you can just build a component on the fly that's fully accessible and validated by accessibility professionals. Really neat stuff coming out in the world. It's kind of cool stuff. Moving on to the next department of delivery. Well, who is delivery, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know it's product owners or project managers, designers, developers, editorial, QA, and stuff like that. The BAs as well. I mean, they really need to have accessibility requirements built into their job description. That's key. That's essential. And some of those accessibility questions should be on the interview. It can just be one question. It can just be one single question. You ask a developer, what are the requirements for an image? You can ask a QA, have they ever used a screen reader before? Or do they have any training on keyboard only testing? You ask a BA who writes stories, or maybe that's the PO's role, depending on your organization. And you say, well, give me an example of an accessibility persona that you would use while building a user story. Because really the responsibility of accessibility lies with every single team member. On screen, I have an example of a checking account, right? And someone may have this. Who owns the defect? The defect is that word checking that I have on screen is not a heading. Well, in fact, that all the way down the line, there is responsibility, right? The requirements are, from an accessibility point of view, a heading is required on every single page, according to the WCAG 131 info and relationships, right? Well, design needs to know to identify the styling and markup to identify it as a header. Copy or editorial needs to know to write accessible, friendly text. Developers need to know to use appropriate markup and make sure that it's not focusable and stuff like that. I see that a lot, by the way. Headings, developers, please stop making headings tabbable. Like, there should be no focus state around them. It's just unnecessary unless it's a link or something like that. And QA needs to know what it should sound like and be able to identify through an automated tool like Axe what that styling looks like. We have to stop thinking of this problem as my problem or your problem. The best teams I've ever worked with for accessibility are highly collaborative and highly cooperative, and they get things done together. QA is not afraid to go back to design and have a conversation with them. And once you can start to break down those internal barriers as well, things are going to go much, much smoother. UX personas. I really like talking about this. This is something I'm recently bringing more and more into my talks I'm not a UX designer by any means, but I really am interested in that field of study because it studies that human behavior and that interaction as well. Personas are an excellent way to consider people who are different than you, right? And there's many online personas that you can use when you're building something. On screen, I have a quick screenshot of a usability persona, a persona. And it says, Serena is straightforward, right? I don't even know where to begin, she has in quotes, and there's too much going on. Well, what could be the issue here, right? She could have ADHD, she could be autistic or dyslexic. It could be something as simple as she could be tired or have a headache. She could be a new or an inexperienced user. Now, what's interesting here is that all three of these bullets are all two of them have nothing really to do with accessibility, if you think about it, right? Tired of headache, we've all experienced that at some point. But imagine if you were, say, building a 911 emergency response page, and what recent studies have shown is that the cognitive load when you are in an emergency situation is so high that it's hard to find obvious information. If you were to build that page, you would probably be recommended to put the phone number for a emergency response right front and center. Your local police front and center would have that number in bold, in big letters, right as soon as the page opens, so that any user can call that number right away. Just a few more things I want to mention with her. Things she appreciates are simple, well-structured layouts. Don't we all? Just right level of information. Don't we all? Contextual support, patterns that help me focus. Let's avoid things that, have to make you remember, complex workflows, large blocks of text, and timed interactions. These are all things that I think all users have struggled with. It's not only persons with disabilities, but by bringing those few tips into your personas, it really does help. I put 2 links on site here that I use to research a little bit more about these personas, and just there's a lot of really, really good data out there. One from UX Design and UX Mag. Please have a look. Now, if I talk to the developers, there are still some code trends that are really, really common. Simple HTML mistakes still make up for about 50% of accessibility issues. These are just going to be caught by browser tools, just by the integrated browser tools like Chrome's Lighthouse. Devs are just not following semantic URL. I'm sorry, developer, but I used to be one, so I feel like I can say this. And H1 are still usually missing on every page. Labels are missing correct associations on forms, and images still missing alt text, right? Like I said before, my recommendation is just run that accessibility browser tool, please. It's Axe or Lighthouse or Wave. Just run it, and you'll know if your page has any kind of issues with it. And everyone who looks at code, like I said before, should be able to run that auditor. Inaccessible common components is maybe a bigger issue, especially when QA finds something that's a common component, and all of a sudden they have to go back and say, this is a global component, or the navigation is not accessible. Well, then a lot of people throw their hands up and say, well, I didn't build it, or regression is going to cost $1 million. We can't audit this. Those are where the bigger problems happen. You've got to check your common components. You've got to make sure those are accessible, because, by the way, developers will copy paste the code, right? If it's inaccessible once, it'll be inaccessible all over. And like I said before, teams missing that accessibility definition of done is a big boon too. Some other easy wins for developers, does Zoom break at 200% or 400% Zoom if you're using WCAG 2.1? Labels, again, on every input, or focusable control. Content should be actionable and reachable by keyboard, testing with enter in space. Is there a logical tab for it? Does it bounce all over the screen? Is there a focus outline on every single element that can receive focus? And are there any keyboard traps, and which are elements that you can't escape? There's only one type of element that should have a keyboard trap, and those are modals. You should, because the focus should only remain inside there, but you want to make sure you use Shift Tab as well to see if those work too. Now, of course, that question, I've got no time and I've got no money, Cam. Like, where do I get started? I've got a developer team. I know it's important. Well, the Web A11y audits the top 1 million websites out there. And they use Wave to just automatically kind of go through all these pages and their home pages and what is still inaccessible. Amazingly, in 2021, low text contrast tops it at 86%. And I'm going to be giving examples for each of these in the next section. There's missing alternative text for images, which encompasses about 60%. I've got missing form input labels, about 54%, empty links, 51%, missing document language at 20%, and empty buttons at 26%, a little bit higher on each of them. These are incredible. And I'm going to show you and developers how I can almost guarantee that your site probably has something like this on there. And by just working on these, you're going to be better than what most other websites on the web, which is pretty incredible. Now, please commit to basics, and this is really going to help you. I'm going to take just a quick pause here and shift focus a little bit. I talked a little bit about business and to leadership and stakeholders and stuff like that, and operations and people who maybe manage a little more. For any developers or coders on the phone, now this section is for you. So if you were maybe half listening up to now this is the section for you, because I want to actually talk about those top 6 issues found on the Web A11y and I want to teach you how to fix them. I've got this all in the blog post. If you go to my blog as well, I've got the code examples there too. I'm going to go through it a little bit quickly here, but maybe for any kind of BA on the phone or any leader role, go check your developers and see if they've done this right too. Because at low text contrast, this is amazing here how I put up on screen. I've got three screenshots. I've got a button that says this contrast sucks, right? And I've got a color contrast analyzer, which is a free tool that you can go and check to see what the color contrast is. Or even within Firefox, I've got another screenshot there that Firefox itself will alert you if the color contrast does not match, which is pretty easy to identify. And like I said, if that collaboration is already there, a developer should have no problem going back to design and saying, hey, you know, the colors that you've assigned me to put on screen here, I'm getting a red flag when I run a color contrast analyzer or Wave or Axe or stuff like that. It's actually flagging this as an issue because I don't enjoy squinting while reading text, and I'm sure you don't either. Number 2, missing alternative text for images. You know, images usually need alt text. They always need the attribute. They always need the attribute. So if it's an informational image, for example, if I'm, you know, I've got an architecture page and I want to demonstrate architecture in India, I've got this image of a building in Kolkata, and maybe I'm highlighting that as a feature. And so I would explain that this is a building in Kolkata. I might have the actual name of that building or the site. But if this is just a filler image demonstrating, you know, examples of images or you know, it's just filler for the site, that would be a decorative image. It does not need any text inside that alt, but it still needs the alt attribute. It's vitally important that you still put the alt attribute. And it's also good for SEO because Google checks that now. Number 3, missing form input labels, which is 332 labels or instructions. 54% of sites still have this issue. So we're talking about labels just not there. So when a screen reader user either pulls up a list of all the issues, or excuse me, a list of all the inputs on their screen, or is just navigating through, they don't know what they're entering data for, which is a huge blocker if you think about it. There's 4 generally different types of labels that you can apply. I'm going to lead with the one that I normally recommend dev teams to start with if they have a choice. That would be the assigned label, where you put a label for, and then you assign the ID of the element inside the label. And that's important because you can style it differently. If you have a component that might change the label at times, this is really easy to manipulate. So I try to lead with this one. You got a nested label, which is similar to the first one, but you just wrap that input inside the label. It operates the same way. A screen reader will still be able to interpret this the same way. The only thing is that it's a bit more difficult for styling to manipulate that label. Not impossible, but just more difficult. You got an are you labeled by element, which is great for all other scenarios, things like modals. When a modal window pops up, you should have a labeled by pointing to the heading on that screen. And but this can be used pretty much anything. If you have a table as well that needs a proper label, you can just associate it with the with another element or the heading kind of nearby as well. You've also got a special case, and I put that as a special case because ARIA label is overused in a lot of development practices. A lot of developers think that by if I look at the excuse me, on screen, I have a list of the 4 different types of labels I'm just speaking about. And the first label being that assigned label. I have developers who try and shove an ARIA label inside an input when they have a label right behind, so it starts to read out twice. That ARIA label really should only be used in events where you need to give more information, or maybe the button, you know, doesn't have enough description just by itself. On screen, I have an input, which is a type button, and the value is X. Maybe we've seen this as a close button before. That would be an appropriate time to use an ARIA label and put close window as the content. Empty links. So your social icons still need alt text. It's amazing. If they're an icon, you can put "Are you hidden true" on there, and you can actually put a screen reader only content that says, you know, for example, here the Accessibility Coders Twitter page. I have 3 social icons. I've got a Twitter bird, I've got the Google Plus, is that even still around? And I've got the Facebook icons here. And each of those, you know, still needs that kind of label too. So think about it. If your icons are images, then by just putting alt text in them, you've actually eliminated 2 Twitter birds with 1 stone. Missing document language. Hello, my fellow Canadians who does internationalization. I have an example here of, I've got 2 screenshots of a bit of code where you need to put the lang attribute on your HTML or your body, the body of the content. Lang equals en. The reason that's important is because a screen reader will read the content based on the language set for the page in the native accent. So if you have it's not there, or maybe it's incorrectly attributed, then what'll happen is the screen reader will read out French pages with an English accent. It sounds hilarious, but it's super frustrating. So you should be able to swap that. And by the way, the language attribute can go on anything, right? So if you have a language switcher on the page, you can actually assign different languages to the different names of language that you can change into. And the screen reader will adapt, which is great. And 6, finally, empty buttons. This is so similar to the empty links, right? It still needs alt text. It doesn't matter. I've got an example of an icon here, and it's a button with an image inside. If you put the alt text inside that image, the label will kind of roll up, and the screen reader will read button, the accessibility coder. And you can see here, I've got a screenshot on the bottom of the NVDA screen reader where it says menu button, submenu graphic, and it still says the accessibility coder as the label. So in conclusion, don't be shy. Speak up in your organization, speak with your inclusivity manager or HR rep, and do small things. You can create a working group inside. You can bring a few developers or team members together who have an interest, who maybe have a passion in something like this, helping other individuals. It will make your business better, and you will sell more as well. And as an individual within the organization, as a QA or design developer, you can command a higher price when you go to new employers if you know accessibility. I know from experience, and you will be a better developer or QA or designer. And it's interesting because the more organizations, and these large organizations, talk about sustainability and these types of business models, the more all organizations should be talking about it too. The UN has sustainable development goals. I've got an image on here for that. And it's right in the middle. We've got environment, society, and economics. And that all kind of is a Venn diagram. Right in the middle is sustainability. And what's amazing is that in 2021, I have spoken to more organizations than ever before, and with less resistance than ever before. So right now is the best time to improve your digital accessibility for everyone. Also, just a quick, interesting infographic as final thoughts. The UN posted this really interesting infographic that maybe we don't see very often. A lot of our focus is on, again, legal issues and stuff like that. But those sustainability goals are in there. Accessibility is in the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. But amazingly, on screen, I have a statistic here that says 52% of schools worldwide are not accessible. That's incredible. 61% of government websites are not accessible. That means that people can't understand how to pay their parking tickets, or maybe they don't understand how to, where to go get water or garbage disposal, right? And even more alarmingly, maybe not in North America, or maybe in North America, in places where floodwaters possibly are a concern, 79% of people will face difficulties and could not evacuate a building in the case of a disaster. Imagine if the flight of stairs was too much. These are all real issues that we're facing today. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation today, and I'm more than happy to answer any kind of questions that you may have.
Thank you, Cam, for the presentation. That's great. So we do have a few questions. So the first one does come from an anonymous because it was in the Q&A, but the question reads, I find many times when I test sites for accessibility, there's an extra list encompassing ARIA issues. What does that mean?
That sounds like a really specific issue. So I'm probably gonna need a little bit more information. I'm not sure if you can put some more information on the chat. Maybe I'll just kind of explain what I think that means while you're typing, and I can just add some of that in. So there's an extreme list of ARIA issues. So ARIA is a developer tool that can make elements accessible. So you can put in certain attributes on elements, and that'll give a leg up if a developer doesn't want to use a native element. And so what happens is that they can go too far. I mentioned just previously, ARIA label is a big one. And you can put ARIA labels everywhere. But in addition to that, they can put role button, or you can put role heading. It's almost used too much now. And developers sometimes don't know what to use, so they put everything in there. Believe me, when I've seen inputs, please enter your password, and they put in ARIA described by, ARIA labeled by, ARIA label, and they'll put ARIA pressed, they'll put ARIA, they'll just dump it all on there because they don't know what to do. So any of those kinds of issues should be brought up with the developer and, explain them. You can just go look up WAI ARIA, ARIA, and that is the site which has all the information on why ARIA and what it's about, how to build components or widgets, as they're called, using ARIA. And I hope that answers the question. Please let me know if there's anything more you need to know for that. Oh, I see Gabby already answering that question. Yes, I actually will put that back on the screen here. I'll go back to the slide where you can download the presentation. It's up right now. I finished this last night, and you can go ahead and download that right away. I'll just go back to that screen. There you go, Caroline. tinyurl.com/tac-gad-2021. So I'll put back up my contact page here. If anyone wants to contact me, probably the best place is on LinkedIn. I'm just bad with social networks. I don't really post on Twitter or Facebook or anything else, really. Definitely not Instagram. You can come visit me and comment on my code, especially there. I like to do live coding sessions. That's a lot of fun, and I can help make your code accessible by you can put it into CodePen as well. But have a look here. You can reach out to me, linkedin.com/in/the accessibility coder or the alley coder, and go to codepen.io/the accessibility coder as well.